So welcome everyone. This is the Empower Essex Energy event. So with me today, I've got Councillor Peter Schwier, our cabinet member for climate action. We'll be doing an introduction, and then we've got presenters that will talk to you about using less energy at home. I've got my colleague Aaron with me. We'll talk about the grants available to residents, our Warm Homes website, and then we have Dan Andrews from CB Heating, which will talk to you about heat pumps. So please welcome, and I'll pass on the word to Councillor Peter Schwier, please.
Thank you, Luciana. Can you hear everybody hear me okay? Yes, good.
Yes.
Good. Okay. Firstly, I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to you all tonight, and I'm very pleased that you've shown interest in this webinar about our focus on energy markets. And of course, with the current energy crisis that's come about and the cost of living, I think there's a real snapshot and focus on what we can do individually to help mitigate some of the expenses, and what we can do in the future to produce more and more energy on a partnership. And one of the, you are going to be hearing tonight, as Luciana has already mentioned, about the process. So you're going to be hearing about the Warm Homes Essex website and the grants that are going to be available from Anne. We're going to be hearing from Chris later on about the Colchester Community Energy, where saving energy at homes, and I'm sure he'll pass on some of his top tips. And then lastly, but I think most importantly as well, is you're going to be hearing from Dan Andrews at CB Heating about heat pumps. And this is really important because heat pumps have a lot of people tend to think of heat pumps and they don't really understand how it works or why they work so well and what they're so efficient, what's involved with the installation, and how they can be incorporated and used with other potential energy sources, as in solar panels and everything else. So I think you're going to have a really interesting webinar. I think the presenters are going to be quite fascinating and give you a lot of help and information, which is what it's all about, because it's about us at Essex County Council is enabling you as residents to find the best solutions for the current interest in the energy markets and how we use our energy at home. So we work in conjunction with Empower, which is a pan-European organisation, and they have also helped given us grants at Essex County Council to employ solar panels, which we've actually put on some of our Danbury Park community school and also our outdoor centre there. So this has been great because not only does it save energy, it shows people how we are saving energy by the deployment of solar panels. It creates interest, and this also helps people when they're visiting there to understand about it and ask questions. So it's really good that we're leading by example in primary schools, secondary schools, and even our country parks, where people have the opportunity to see and understand about this. But you're going to hear a lot more about this evening, and I think it's going to hopefully enlighten you all about what heat pumps can do, what grants are available, and what energy tips are available as well. And I'm sure in the question and answer time, should you get plenty of those in, it's going to be all about saving energy at your home to help you as residents and help you have a hopefully warmer, better, more energy efficient homes going forward. So I think I better hand back now to Luciana, but I'm sure that you will find this webinar of great interest for all of the speakers that are going to come about in the next hour. Thank you.
Hello, so not Luciana, but Aaron this time. But thanks Peter for your kind words and introduction. So this is where the tech may fail me, but I'll try to share my screen. Okay. It looks to me like that is up. Please do put in the chat if this isn't working for you. So, hello everyone, I am Aaron McSorley. I work at Essex County Council within the Energy and Low Carbon team on various different activities. So one of the main issues and projects and work we're doing, as you can imagine, based on the conversation we're having today, is around domestic retrofit and how we can support those across the county. So there's a lovely dreary picture of Essex to get us in the mood. So the challenge, obviously, we all kind of are aware that our homes are consuming a lot of energy, electricity and gas, and costing us more and more money, as we're seeing in the news with the price caps and things like that. But the government has set deadlines for reaching net zero on all domestic properties across the whole UK by 2050. So quite ambitious still, and ourselves within Essex County Council and the Essex Climate Action Commission have gone even further and are looking for all fuel poor households and 66% of all properties to be retrofitted to net zero by 2030, and by 2040 for all domestic properties to be net zero. So we're talking about 650,000 homes within Essex, quite a sizable amount, and how we go about doing that. One of the main problems within that is actually there's obviously we can see that there's lots of new builds going up. People might be liking that or not, and but actually 80% of the homes which are here now will still be here in 2050. So there's a massive challenge around retrofit. How do we deal with these different archetypes of buildings, different styles of build, and tenure types as well? So yeah, huge contribution to carbon emissions. Huge cost to the NHS at £1.4 billion from one study, based on people not being able to go home to their insufficiently heated homes and poor quality homes. So that's having a massive cost to the NHS as well. So currently we're looking at around 109,000 households of that 650 within Essex living in fuel poverty. We're having some new data which is being updated to look at what the effect of the new price cap is having, but yeah, quite a sizable amount of people who are struggling to pay their bills and the effects of that. So we see retrofit as a massive opportunity as well, actually, because it's going to have a huge impact on new jobs, a positivity around employment, and decreasing the cost to residents, making it more warm for those residents, and improving their health. So one of the things which we've been doing at Essex is we saw a gap in the current kind of knowledge sharing across the space. So there's lots and lots of different great schemes which have been delivered by districts and borough councils, the county council, charities, other voluntary sector organisations, but actually it's quite disparate in terms of how that information gets to residents and professionals alike. So we set up the Warm Homes Essex website as a one-stop shop to try and keep all of that stuff in one place, make it easier for a resident to go through, pick whichever district or borough. So I live in Colchester, I'm looking for a scheme because I'm struggling or looking to reduce my bills, or I'm just looking to save on my energy. And actually it follows that route through and gives you a list of all of the different projects which are available. You can then submit an expression of interest directly to all of those schemes at one time, rather than having to fill out lots of different forms just to get your kind of name on their books. And then they will then get in touch with you to let you know what support there is available. So we've seen this as a great opportunity to get this message out. We also have lots of energy saving tips and advice available to residents. Chris will go through some more different ones a bit later on, but we also have lots of case studies, best practice, and just general up to date information about the vast range of changes and information which is coming out of government and the regulator. So yeah, we're looking to create that knowledge and ability for residents and professionals to refer in. So again, if you work within a public facing role where you might be engaging with potentially vulnerable residents, there is also an opportunity for you to refer those guys in who may benefit from some of the funding and schemes available. So building on that and some of the schemes which are in there, funding opportunities which we've been delivering at Essex County Council. So we are fully committed to attracting and delivering funding with our partners across the county and nationally to very much drive home and build retrofit schemes within the county. We've been working with Citizens Advice Essex, so they helped us develop that website, and a partner within the website. We also deliver various other support schemes with them. So one's also called Warm Homes Essex, which is energy and financial wellbeing advice to residents, helping them access benefits which they might not have been in receipt of, and also advice around energy issues. We previously have delivered a scheme called the Green Homes Grant Local Authority Delivery Phase 1A. So if you are well versed in these schemes, there's been quite a few different ones over the past couple of years. So we supported 83 homes to be retrofitted. That was delivered by Essex County Council. We are now supporting and driving engagement within the LAD2 scheme and the Sustainable Warmth scheme, which is a further £22 million available to residents. That scheme is open until March 2023. So there's links, obviously we'll share these slides with you, where you can register if you are on low income, so under £30,000 household income and living in an EPC EF or G rated property. And we are also delivering another project with social housing providers, Sanctuary and Eastlight, to retrofit some of their social housing across the county. There's future funding available for that, which social housing providers and local authorities are bidding for now. So if you are living in social housing, do get in contact with your provider and give them a kick up the backside and let them know that they should be bidding for some money and potentially help you retrofit your home. So here's just a quick case study from one of the recipients of the Green Homes Grant, which Essex delivered.
I had my loft re-insulated. It had been insulated before, but when he came round, the surveyor, he found that it was a fire hazard. So the whole loft insulation had to be replaced. No, I don't think I would, because I saw the cost when it came through. It was in the region of £1,000, which is an awful lot of money. So I certainly wouldn't have had it done without the scheme, no. Oh yes, for a start, it costs absolutely nothing. You're helping the green effort by Essex County Council and the government, but yes, I recommend it highly. Yes, it doesn't cost you any time or trouble or money, and we know what could be better.
There we go. So yeah, who can say it better than Elizabeth? Great advocate for the scheme. So yeah. Another project which we've been delivering over a few years now is Solar Together Essex. This is around how do we drive more renewable energy generation capacity within the county, supporting residents to get access to solar panels on their roofs, to drive down their energy costs and also drive down the cost of those solar panels. So through a group purchasing scheme, so by having more people signing up, they can drive a harder bargain with the supplier and get a better deal for the actual cost of the installation. So the next scheme is going to be launched 23rd of January, so keep your eyes peeled for that if you're interested. Yeah, so these previously it's reduced costs by an average of a third, and we've installed 770 solar panel installations in 2019 and 2021, and another 600 have been delivered in 2022 currently. So that's over 1,300 tonnes of carbon saved by the installation. So another great scheme which Essex is delivering. And another, so we'll be moving on to Christopher soon, but we have been supporting community energy groups to establish within the county. So we've helped them through funding and incorporation, and they're now out there offering free energy advice to the residents in their local community. So Chris is here today from Community Energy Colchester, another great advocate for the cause. And yeah, so if you are aware of these other or live in the other areas, so in Danbury, Saffron Walden, Tollesbury, they're also doing drop-in sessions, and you can contact them for advice around energy efficiency. And finally, we have support for businesses. So obviously a lot of you guys are working and may own your own business or work in companies who are also seeing the pinch and seeing that the struggles with energy bills, which are going quite literally through the roof. We have another grant scheme called LowCase, which stands for Low Carbon Across the South East. This provides grants of up to £10,000 to improve the energy efficiency of businesses within Essex, Kent, East Sussex, and some of the other southern counties. But also we can support businesses who are within the low carbon sector, like CB Heating, who you'll be hearing from later, who provide heat pumps, to improve and grow as a business. So yeah, do get in touch if you're interested. We've got that funding again still until spring next year. We can provide links to access that, but we've supported multiple hundreds of businesses across the county to reduce their running costs and be more resilient. And I think that's it for me. I think we will probably be doing questions later on, but there's my contact details, and we'll be sharing the slides. But thank you very much.
Aaron, we don't have Chris online yet. I will pass on to Dan from CB Heating then, and then we come back to Chris.
Sounds good.
Okay, no problem. I need to request control.
Stop sharing.
And Luciana, whether you can do that for me?
I send you live, so you're live now, I think. Try to share it, please. You are as an organizer, so you should be able to share.
Okay, how's that?
Yeah, and then we send that live. I think it's live now.
Okay, so yeah, hopefully everyone can see that. So yeah, our company, CB Heating, and CB Heat Pumps is of course the part that focuses on the heat pumps. We, as you can see, are in partnership with EDF. We received some funding from EDF, now work very closely with them. That allows us to get into various different kind of schemes, working with both home owners and also under the Eco4 obligation, which is the energy company obligation, working for lower income homes. So we've got quite a variety of offerings. But specifically what we're going to talk about this evening is heat pumps themselves, and of course how they work, what they are, and what they can do for you. So what is a heat pump and how does it work? It is all based on this is supposed to be an animation. It's not animating, never mind. Okay, so it's all based on the refrigeration process, which, as you can see on this particular diagram, on the left-hand side, there's what's known as an evaporator coil. That's where the cold gas, the refrigerant gas, goes through a coil on the back of the heat pump itself. Now that cold gas is colder than the environment, which means as air is blown across it, actually warms up. It absorbs heat from the environment. That then goes through to a compressor. The compressor then squeezes that gas into a liquid, and that compression raises the temperature. And that temperature is then released via the condenser coil, which is essentially a heat exchanger. And that process continues. Now that may sound fairly technical to some people. So where have we seen this before? And the simple answer is we have seen it in a fridge. Heat pumps are not new. In fact, they've been around for over 100 years. Refrigeration, as we're familiar with it in our fridges, say over 100 years old. It's the same basic technology. With a fridge, it's extracting the heat from the inside of a fridge and just getting rid of it at the back of the fridge there. So it's that same thing. It's absorbing the heat from the air outside and utilizing that red section there to actually heat your home. Now, You will, I'm sure, all have seen these before. Essentially, they're air conditioning units. Now, air conditioning units can be run forwards and backwards. Now, what that means is they can provide cooling, which of course is how we're most familiar with them, but they can also provide heating by running them back to front. Now, say we're all familiar with these, we've seen them all over the place. However, we may not have seen too many of these, and this is an air to water heat pump. An air to water heat pump is designed to work with a wet heating system. So in other words, it's traditional radiators. Now, this particular system you see there is what's known as a high temperature heat pump, and that essentially works as a boiler replacement, but we'll talk more about that shortly. But this is specifically for domestic use. An air to water system, unlike air conditioning, which is air to air, where it's blowing out either warm or cool air. This works with traditional radiators. That said, there are many different types of heat pumps. There's many different uses, different applications, different types of properties and such like. And of course, they come in all different shapes and sizes, as we can see from this slide here. Now, interestingly, not every house is suitable for a heat pump, and this is perhaps what we may have heard in the news or in just general chit chat. It's all down to the heat loss of the building itself. If the heat loss is too great, then a heat pump isn't necessarily the right solution. So some houses can be further insulated, as we can see from this particular graphic here. Clearly, the house on the left is nicely well insulated, all very blue on this thermo imaging. House on the right, for all intents and purposes, an identical property with a considerably greater heat loss. And this is where, sometimes we're asked the question, if it is the heat pump my neighbour's got going to work for me? Well, we really don't know until we've carried out in-depth heat loss calculations. And from there, we might well advise that a property is further insulated or that other measures are applied. The cost of running a heat pump compared to a gas boiler. Now, this is obviously something that people do ask very often. Interestingly, even before energy prices went absolutely crazy, still around 75% of heat pumps actually went into homes that were replacing a gas boiler. Now, what that means is that people were doing this even when there was no saving on energy bills. The motivation isn't always about saving money, it is about saving the environment, or it may well be a more longer term view, because of course there is an upfront cost for homeowners, which will take a fair amount of time to recover that cost. But if you have that long term view, it's something that certainly makes sense. Now, as we all know, the cost of fuel has since gone quite crazy. The average unit price for dual fuel customers paying by direct debit will be limited to 34 pence for electricity and 10 pence for gas. Now, this is certainly very important. We'll come on to why in a moment. Now, the average heat pump COP. Now, what is COP? COP is a coefficient of performance. And what this really means is that for to get 3 kilowatts of heat out of a heat pump, you need to put 1 kilowatt of electricity in. So it's that 3-to-1 ratio. So 1 kilowatt electricity in, 3 kilowatts of heat out with a heat pump. Now, if you compare that to an average new gas boiler, let's say it's running at 98% efficiency, excuse me, that would then give you a 0.98 to 1 coefficient of performance, essentially, meaning you get 0.98 kilowatt hours of heat out for every 1 kilowatt hour of gas you put in. Compare that to an older gas boiler, it's more like 80%. So again, you're looking at 0.8 kilowatts of heat out for every 1 kilowatt of gas you put in. Hopefully that's making sense to everyone. Therefore, the cost of 1 kilowatt of heat from a heat pump using electricity with a 3-to-1 coefficient of performance is around about 11.3 pence. If you compare that to a new gas boiler, the cost of 1 kilowatt of heat is around about 10.5 pence. With an older gas boiler, maybe 12.9 pence. So what we're seeing here is that the cost of heating your house with a heat pump is certainly comparable to that of a gas boiler now, as a result of the differences in energy prices. So this is all assuming that these gas boilers have actually been set up correctly. Now, they may well be 98% efficient out of the box, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's 98% efficient when it's in situ, and how the system's working in the house. So there are certainly many situations today where a heat pump will cost a significant amount less than the cost of a gas boiler. And that's a really important change, largely due to the difference in energy prices. So other than the cost of energy right now, why is right now the right time to get a heat pump? Well, certainly for homeowners, there is a £5,000 grant available. This is directly off the upfront price, so it's an immediate reduction of £5,000. The grant itself is paid to the heat pump company, so as I say, that's how it reduces that upfront payment. Additionally, the reason why right now is the right time to get a heat pump is largely due to the fact that you're probably going to have to buy one at some point anyway, and that is whether you like it or not. And the reason why it's whether you like it or not is due to legislation coming into force where, for example, on new build properties from 2025, they can no longer have a gas boiler installed. So alternative solutions will be needed at that point in time on new build properties. For the vast majority of cases, a heat pump will be the obvious choice, and quite often the best solution for them due to the 3-to-1 ratio. Also, due to the legislative focus on the electrification of domestic heating, it's likely that carbon tax will be removed from the cost of electricity and added to the cost of gas. Now, you may all be aware that obviously we're all paying various forms of green tax and such like on our energy, but the focus is moving to using electricity for heating. As a result, electricity companies will offer special heat pump tariffs to tip the balance further in favour of the electrification of heat. And interestingly, Octopus Energy already do this. We have also seen special tariffs for electric cars, for example. And it's much the same thing. It's all about this electrification in the future. Now, regardless of that above information, the fact that we're going to have to do it at some point, the focus on the electrification of heat, some people may still feel they'd rather wait and see what energy prices do, and then perhaps in 3 or 5 years' time, they might then buy a heat pump. Now, the problem with this approach is that £5,000 grant that we mentioned will no longer be there. This £5,000 grant currently is only running for 3 years, which actually started this April. So we've got the best part 2.5 years left. So if you wait in excess of that period, there will no longer be that grant. Now, if you think about it from the point of view of the grant, and the reason why it's there is to incentivise early adopters. When the energy prices change again in the future, and there's, a heat pump is so much more cheaper to run than gas at that stage, there's no need for them to offer that grant. So that grant does currently cover around about 25 to 35% of the cost. So certainly that is a reason to do it now. Now, even if one were to feel that the saving on energy prices right now is minimal, the £5,000 saving on the purchase price is significant. And that does then massively swing in favour of installing a heat pump now rather than after that grant finishes. So what we mean by that is, even if you're not really saving over the next few years, if you then decide to have one in 3 to 5 years' time, it's simply going to cost you more money. So it does make more sense to do that now, particularly when we remember point 1 above, which is that you are more likely going to have one of these at some point. So once again, it makes sense to get one when it's going to cost you £5,000 less. Now, there are various myths around heat pumps. Probably the classic example is they don't work in the winter. Bear in mind that this is air being blown across a chilled element, and that chilled element extracting heat from the air. Many people fail to realise that the actual refrigerant is circulating at minus 28 degrees C. Now, it only actually requires a 2-degree differential in heat. So in other words, it will actually still be able to extract heat from the air when the air is at minus 26 degrees C. Now, we simply don't get those kind of temperatures in this country. However, if we look at the heat pump sales per households in 2021, it's really interesting to see the countries that are at top of that list. Norway, Finland, certainly Estonia, Lithuania, and Denmark and Sweden. They all have considerably cooler, colder winters than our own. Now, the difference in the number of systems installed in those countries compared to the UK, right at the very bottom there, that would suggest that it has absolutely nothing to do with the weather and how cold a winter may or may not be. The truth of the matter is that these Scandinavian countries actually had similar types of grant schemes to what we have today all the way back in 1995. Again, if we remember from the very beginning, heat pumps aren't new. You know, they've been around for 100 years. So you could argue it's really down to education, people being aware of these things, and therefore taking up the installation of them. So they certainly do work in the winter, and so people need to be aware of that. The next point, again, another myth, is that they're too noisy. The truth of the matter is an awful lot of people have never even seen one, so it's all hearsay on that basis. But how loud is an air source heat pump? Well, the legal limit is 42 decibels, which that in itself doesn't necessarily mean a lot to many people. So as a comparison, a laptop, in fact, many of you may well be watching this on your laptop. That laptop in front of you right now apparently is making 40 decibels. A heat pump is 42 decibels. So if you're quite happy with that laptop sat on your lap at 40 decibels, I'm sure you'd be quite happy with a heat pump outside your house at 42 decibels. Your fridge is around about 42 decibels. What I find probably the best example of sound and noise, and to really get an idea, is a dishwasher at 65 decibels, and we're all quite happy having one of those in our kitchen, in the house. That's louder than an air source heat pump outside. Obviously a vacuum cleaner and a hairdryer, significantly louder, but certainly the comparison there of your own fridge and your dishwasher being louder or the same as a heat pump, I think is a really good indication of these are certainly not noisy things. Finally, the popular myth that you have to change all of your radiators. Again, high temperature heat pumps is actually the one we looked at just earlier. High temperature heat pumps can produce flow temperatures of up to 70 degrees C. Now, interesting, you wouldn't set up a heat pump to run as hot as that. You don't need to. But the point here is that they're capable of doing that. And that is regardless of the UK weather. They are specifically designed to be a direct boiler replacement. Meaning there's no need to change those radiators. So yeah, there is one there outside that house, and yes, they do work all the way down to the minus temperatures that we find in this country, certainly very comfortably. So yeah, those are the myths dealt with really, and it is largely about, you know, if people don't know the truth about these things, then those myths will be believed. So in summary, heat pumps are the future of heating. The energy companies know this, hence why the likes of EDF have invested in ourselves. Octopus Energy, again, very strong on heat pumps. E.ON, you may also have seen advertising on TV recently regarding heat pumps. So the energy companies know that they are the future of heating. People in countries with the same or worse weather, or winters rather, than ourselves, as we saw in the graph just a moment ago, they know this. And so perhaps now you too know this as well. Heat pumps are the future of heating. And certainly on that note, we are very happy to answer any questions you may have. Hopefully that was interesting and useful to you.
Thanks, Dan. We've got a few questions for you, and then I think there's already a few questions for Aaron as well in the chat. We said we were going to leave questions to the end, but I think it's worth getting some of them now so we don't have a large range of questions at the end. So for you, Dan, there's two questions about heat pump. How much is a typical heat pump for a home? Yeah, so as we said earlier, you know, they will vary, largely due to the heat loss to the building and also the size of the building. But as a variance,
anywhere between £13,000 and £17,000 is a good sort of range. And as I say, for homeowners, of course, there is that £5,000 grant that comes directly off of that. Once again, it does depend on the extent of the work. You should always start from a fabric first approach. So in other words, it may well require additional insulation, and so that would need to be factored in. On occasions, radiators do need to be changed. Hot water cylinders may need to be changed, so that may need to be factored in as well.
And then the other question, is there a comparison of heat pumps versus electricity, not gas? I am in storage heaters. Yeah,
so that's actually really a nice, easy comparison because obviously they're both using the same fuel. They're both using electricity. So we're then back to the coefficient of performance. So with a heat pump, the heat that it uses to heat your house isn't generated by electricity. It's harvested from the air outside. The electricity is purely used to power the machine. Whereas with a storage heater or an electric radiator, anything like that, the electricity is what's producing the heat. So on that basis, you can only ever get a maximum of 100% efficient, which may sound great. However, that's a 1-to-1 coefficient of performance. So we then compare that to that of a heat pump, which is a 3-to-1. So essentially, a heat pump is 300% efficient in as much as you put 1 kilowatt of electricity in, you get 3 kilowatts of heat out. With a storage heater or electric radiator, you put 1 kilowatt of electricity in, you get 1 kilowatt of heat out. So on that basis, a heat pump is around about a third of the running cost of electric heating.
Right, I think that's all the questions I had for you, Dan. People were not seeing you, I think, but I think they got the points. Can you stay until the end, Dan, in case there's any more questions?
Yep, certainly.
Okay, so thank you. I will invite then Aaron to answer the two questions we have there in the chat. One about village halls and the other one about the LAD scheme.
Yeah, so village halls, essentially it depends what you do in the village hall and who owns it. So if you trade in some capacity, say you have a bar in there or you rent out the hall and you could be classed as a small or medium-sized business, you could be eligible for low case funding. So that was one of the slides earlier where you can get a grant for energy efficiency measures for businesses. If not, you're maybe the building's owned by the parish council or something like that. We also have the Climate Action Challenge Fund, which you can bid in for and get some funding. I think it's up to £20,000 potentially for various different things around climate action, not limited to retrofit and things like that. So it could be around sustainable transport or green spaces, things like that. So we can share information about those options for you. And the LAD scheme, we'd have to double check with the people who run the current sustainable warmth program around air-to-air heat pumps and their eligibility. I'd assume they are eligible, but then it might have just been a case when the retrofit assessor or coordinator was on site that the recommended option due to cost or due to the energy savings would have been a storage heater instead of an air-to-air heat pump.
Right, thank you, Aaron. So we're going to send Grace live now. So Chris from Community Energy Colchester is going to cover some energy saving tips, so how you can use less energy at home. Thanks, Chris. Sorry, Chris is still muted. Let's see if we can unmute you, or maybe you can unmute yourself.
Yep, that's better. Okay, thank you very much. It's Christopher from Community Energy Colchester. We're a cooperative, which means we're a non-profit organisation. We're wanting to create practical solutions that you can actually install today or this week in your own home at very, very low cost. We've done lots of research. We've been working fantastically with Essex County Council. Thank you so much for supporting us with that and giving me the opportunity of talking today. So I've got about 5 quick tips for you. So instead of showing you slides, I've got some props with me today. And the first thing is about, instead of heating the home, is actually heating the person. Now, once upon a time, they used to be known as long johns, but these things are, this stretch fabric is actually base layer. Now, base layer is worn right on the skin, underneath all of your clothes, is an excellent way of heating the person and not the entire room. These at the moment, you can purchase these for about £15 a set. So you can have plenty of opportunity there of staying warm in your own home. Another energy saving tip that we've got is actually heating water during the day for cups of tea. Every time you switch your kettle on, you're going to be using extra energy that you might not necessarily have to do. A flask like this will hold about 15 cups of tea or coffee. So you're boiling your kettle once, you're filling the kettle up, and it's there on tap. You can use it in your cooking, or you can use it with your tea and your coffee. So it's, again, this is probably about £10–15 worth of kit that you can use this winter, next winter, and future winters as well. So the next thing that I have is these simple insulation for doors and windows. Often, if you look around, you'll feel a cool breeze coming through either the gaps in the windows where the windows are not closing properly, or around the outside, you'll find that there are gaps. Using this insulation tape, which is like a foam tape, it's self-adhesive, it's really easy to put on, and these cost about, probably you could get one door done for about £3 or £4 and a set of windows. Another quick fix is something like this. Now this is plastic sheeting, which basically offers you a sort of a secondary glazing. Now this can, it's unfortunately it is kind of single use, but at least it's single use over the winter period. You can put it up yourself quite simply on your windows, trapping that layer of air in between the glass and this plastic sheeting. So that's another quick advice. Another way of keeping the person warm and not spending loads of energy and money keeping the rest of the house heated up is this really ancient piece of tech, which is known as a hot water bottle. Literally, so I do a lot of homeworking when I'm studying, when I'm researching. Filling one of these up in midwinter, I can actually keep myself warm. This literally will get strapped to me and I'll stay nice and toasty warm throughout the day. It probably lasts about 5 or 6 hours. That's that one. Now the next one, the last one I have, is called a hay box cooker. Now cooking, as we know, every time you switch on a ring, we use electric for cooking, you'll use about 250 watts of electricity per ring. If you're using the oven, you'll be using 500 watts. Now the interesting thing is, the more watts you use, the more money it's going to cost you. So many years ago, a hay box cooker, it's not quite a box of hay, but this is quite simply a box, and inside it's a plastic box with a plastic lid. I have some old yoga mats, which I use for insulation, and inside there, this is one of those foil wraps that you put on the windscreen of a motor car. Now the process is doing a one-pot meal in a cast iron pan. You bring it up to the boil. You can use vegetables in there. You can even put meat in there. Do a little bit of research about what kind of foods that you want to put in there. But basically you fill that pot up, and then that pot then gets put in the bottom of the container there, the plastic box, and then we trap the air inside. If that air, that hot, steaming hot air can't go anywhere, it stays cooking the meal, it stays cooking the food. And within about 3 hours, you can have a fully cooked casserole or a tagine or something like that. It's also possible to bake bread in a cast iron pot in a hay box cooker. Now, using a hay box cooker, you're only going to use about 10 minutes of gas or electricity to heat that pot up before then switching the electricity off and putting that pot in the hay box cooker, trapping the air, and then you've got a really tasty meal for a family of 4, possibly 5 or 6, depending on the size of the pot. So that's a really important way. These are very practical solutions. If you want to know a little bit more, you can contact us through Essex County Council, Community Energy Colchester, in Wivenhoe once a month on the first Thursday of every month at the William Lovelace. We're open and having discussions on there about how we can stay warm. We're also there to answer questions about heating, which heat. The fantastic project that Essex County Council put together, Solar Together, people really need to know a little bit more about photovoltaics and how they work and what's the cost. In the beginning, we were lucky. Here in our house, we were one of the first of the installations that went in, and I can promise you, you will not be disappointed. It really does help keep the bills down, and if you can afford the battery bank to capture that energy, it is a solution for the future for sure. So that just about brings me to the end of my presentation. If anybody has any questions, I'm really happy to answer them. Thank you, Luciana.
Thank you, Chris. Just give me some time. There's some questions that take some time to reach the chat, but I've got a lot of questions there for Dan at CB Heating, and he will answer that in a minute. And just to let everyone know that the groups like Colchester Community Energy, and there's a few more groups in Essex, which we'll send in the slides. They're always happy to provide energy advice to residents, even if it's, I know Chris is quite happy to also reach out to Clacton residents and surrounding areas in tendering. So please contact the one closest to you if you need some help. And yes, let's see if I've got. Yeah, no new questions now, Chris. Please hold on, because they take some time to reach me, and I will pass on the word again to Dan so he can answer the questions about heat pumps. There's quite a lot of them now in the chat now. Dan, do you want me to read some of them for you? So is the last one I've got here. Is there a performance difference between air and ground source heat pumps?
Yeah, they're quite different machines. So ground source, it's quite a consistent range of performance out of that, because of course it's getting the heat from the ground, as the name would suggest. When you get around about 18 inches to a metre below surface level, the actual heat within that ground is quite consistent, regardless of the temperature outside. So the consistency of that coefficient of performance is really key with the ground source system. Obviously, with the air source, there's less consistency because, of course, you get such a variation in air temperatures from one season to another. So what you end up with, we mentioned earlier, was a coefficient of performance. What you end up with is what's known as a seasonal coefficient of performance, or a SCOP, as it's used, as it's referred to, and that basically is the average. So it takes into account, and this 3-to-1 ratio is essentially what we're talking about. There is a seasonal coefficient of performance. And once again, it will vary from one house to another. It will vary depending on the heat emitters, whether it's radiators, whether it's underfloor heating, the amount of insulation in the building. So it's all indicative. Now, the question then might be, so is a ground source heat pump better than an air source heat pump? And the answer to that is there's no real, one is not necessarily better than the other. Perhaps with a ground source heat pump, one of the reasons why very few people actually go for them is the cost of installation. It could be upwards of £40,000 or more. Certainly we've heard costs of £75,000, £80,000. The reason why the cost is so high is, again, it's dependent on the ground that it's going into. You know, if it's going into more of a rocky type of ground compared to a clay type of ground or sandy, all of that requires different levels and types of excavation. And that's kind of the point. It needs to be excavated, and we're talking about potentially excavating 1/4 of an acre of ground. Alternatively, you can go down instead of going across, and then you're using boreholes, and they could well be 100 meters, or you could have a collection of boreholes, but holes in the ground are very expensive, and so as a result, that's where there's that big difference in price for very little advantageous in performance.
Thanks, Dan. The next one, how durable are heat pumps? How long does a typical household heat pump last before it needs replacing?
Yeah, it's a good question. The short answer is the expected life is around about 25 years. The slightly longer answer is, you know, how long does your fridge last? You know, a well-engineered fridge will last for years and years and years. You know, there's not a huge amount of moving parts in there. The servicing of these items is very straightforward. It's mainly a case of keeping them clean, because there's air flowing through very fine fins on the back of these things. So you just need the air to continuously flow through there. So servicing is mainly about cleaning. There's very little to go wrong with them. So 20-25 years is a very reasonable lifespan to expect from them.
Thank you. So would the economies of scale mean that when the new legislation comes in, banning gas boilers, heat pumps will be more competitively priced than now?
Again, that's a very common question that we're asked, and it's a case of going back to perhaps that graph that we saw earlier, in that the UK is very much late to the party when it comes to heat pumps. So we use exclusively one manufacturer, and that manufacturer is known as Daikin. Anywhere else in the world, everyone will be familiar with that brand. In the UK, very few people have heard of Daikin. Now, to put into context, in terms of the economies of scale question, Daikin produce heat pumps and air conditioning units, and they turn over $21 billion a year globally on the manufacture of heat pumps. When the UK starts installing a few 100,000 of them per year, which would be, you know, a massive uplift, even if Daikin had 25% of the market value, yeah, that is not much scale compared to what they're already producing. And so we have to remember that these things are commonplace across the rest of the globe, very much established. Now, the flip side of that as well is that, let's say, actually, let's humour that and say that actually, yeah, the cost did go down. The actual cost of the machine itself, the heat pump itself, is only part of the overall cost of installation. The rest of that cost of installation is labour, which of course will continue to increase as time goes by. It's other materials, copper pipe, for example, again, very expensive at this point in time, and all the other materials that are contained within that system. So it's not just the heat pump itself. It's not, for example, it's not like PV solar panels, which they did enjoy a massive decrease in cost as they caught on. So ultimately, this is a fridge. It's already caught on.
Great question. Thanks, Dan, for the answer. Would you need one heat pump only, regardless of house size?
So the second part of that question is in itself is the answer. So it is dependent on the size of the property, but probably more importantly, the heat loss of that property. So if, for example, the output of a heat pump is 13 kilowatts, and the heat loss of the building is greater than 13 kilowatts, then you would need to pair up two heat pumps in what's known as a cascade formation. This practice is commonplace with gas boilers, interestingly. In very large properties, you'll quite often have 2 or maybe 3 gas boilers running side by side. It's the same concept as that. So yes, you can pair them up if you've got a particularly large property or a particularly high heat loss. However, the question might actually be, is a heat pump the most suitable solution in that situation? And so it would need to be looked at on a case-by-case basis.
Thanks, Dan. Another question about, is there any data on heat pumps versus oil boilers?
Once again, we're back to that coefficient of performance for 1 kilowatt of electricity in, 3 kilowatts out, and then back to the efficiency of a particular oil boiler and the cost of oil per kilowatt. Now, the cost of oil fluctuates considerably. We've certainly found here over the last few years, we've had people that we've initially spoken to have then filled their oil tanks at a point in time where oil was ridiculously cheap, and they've said to us at that point in time, oh, it'll take me 100 years to get my money back on a heat pump. Those same people ring us up the following year saying the price of oil has gone through the roof. Can I have one of those heat pumps? So the problem there is that the fluctuation of the cost of oil. Now, if it continues to increase, if it maintains a high price, then it's the same situation as with the gas boilers. It becomes certainly a viable alternative from a cost point of view. However, what we are finding is the majority of our oil customers that are changing to heat pumps, they're not necessarily doing it for the savings. It is largely from an environmental point of view. It's that they've simply had enough of oil, the smell associated with oil, running out of oil, the faff of getting oil delivered. Maybe they've had their oil stolen. There's many different factors, and interesting, it's not a one size fits all. It's not all about the saving. It could be all kinds of different motivations.
Thanks, Dan. Please hold it just for me 1 minute because we've got a few more questions. Is the grant open to all, or is it just lower income households?
The boiler upgrade scheme grant, which is the one I referred to as the £5,000 grant, that is open to absolutely anyone. I think, however, the key point actually to point out there is that it is a boiler upgrade scheme. So, for example, if you've got, biomass, which is considered a green fuel, then it wouldn't qualify. Biomass, of course, is wood chips, for example. That wouldn't qualify for the boiler upgrade scheme because it's meant to be reducing the carbon. So if you've got a carbon heating system, then you would qualify for that.
Can you qualify if you got electric heating as well?
Do you know, I knew you were going to ask me that as soon as I was saying about the low carbon side of things. As far as I'm aware, with the likes of storage heaters and such like, it does qualify.
Okay. A question about older homes and why are they not, if they are suitable and not recommended for homes that lose a lot of heat. Would these be older homes with no cavity wall?
Yeah, I mean, typically if they've got no cavity wall, then of course the levels of insulation aren't there. Now, that's not to say that they can't have them full stop. It means that they'd have to look at improving the levels of insulation. And there's all kinds of options there. So for houses without cavity, obviously you can't pump the walls with a cavity insulation. However, you can what's known as wrap the house. In other words, it's external insulation. It's a very hard high density foam that is physically attached to the outside the building and then typically rendered over the top of it, and so that then wraps it in a nice warm jacket. Essentially, you can do the opposite, which is to internally insulate, and that would be to basically create a cavity by layering the wall with wooden stud work, put the fluffy insulation that you'd be familiar with inside that gap that you've created, and then plasterboard over the top. So there are options, but it still doesn't necessarily mean that it's suitable for everyone. Listed buildings, for example, you're not going to be able to wrap a listed building. You may not even be able to do the internal walls. Same story with windows. If it's got to be replacing like for like with sash windows, the genuine type sash windows, then single glaze perhaps. Or if you've got leaded light windows, all these types of factors in certain situations may mean that a heat pump isn't the right answer. That said, in many situations it can be. So it's a case-by-case basis.
So last two questions. One is about grants, if there are any available grants for new self-build properties. And I read the next one as well, so you can cover both. If radiators have to be replaced, will these increase the costs greatly?
Okay, so yeah, two separate questions. So new builds, again, yes, they do. If they're a self-build, so it's a private self-build new build house, yes, you can get the boiler upgrade scheme grant of £5,000. If it's a commercial builder building an estate full of houses, no, they do not get that. In terms of the cost of radiators, clearly, yeah, if you're adding in additional equipment such as radiators, then they come at an additional cost. This is where the high temperature heat pump is often the right solution in that type of scenario, because whilst the high temperature heat pump does cost more than a low temperature heat pump, it doesn't always cost as much as a full set of radiators. So it still becomes a more cost-effective solution, as it is essentially designed to be a direct boiler swap working with existing radiators. And whilst I've said it numerous times, unfortunately, it's the same again, which is it's a case-by-case basis. And so every house is different from that point of view. And you may well have different radiators to your next-door neighbours, for example.
Brilliant. So yeah, I think we've answered all the questions in the Q&A, and yeah, we reached the end of our session today. So it's 6 minutes past 7. I think we're all tired now and want to have a rest. Dan, thank you so much for staying until the end and answering all the questions.
Pleasure.
Chris as well for your energy saving tips, and Arrow for talking about all the projects that we are involved as Essex County Council. I hope you all found the information in this webinar useful. Please, if you can, leave some feedback in the Q&A as well. What do you find most useful? If you think you learned more about heat pumps, how you see, like, are you feeling a bit more informed about what you can do at home with energy and about heat pumps? So please leave some feedback in the chat so we can continue to organize this kind of events. Thank you. Have a good evening.
Cheers. Bye.